Chapter 28, Section 3 continued. It is election time, election of 1952, and a major issue in this election is going to be Korea. Truman had served almost two full terms, so he doesn't run again, basically because he had little support after the MacArthur thing and stuff. So the Republicans are going to see this as a chance to break their 20-year hold of the Democrats in office. And, you had FDR elected 4 times and then Truman. And so Republicans see this as their chance, and they nominate Dwight D. Eisenhower, war hero of World War II, and his VP candidate, Richard Milhouse Nixon. The Democrats are going to nominate Adlai Stevenson from here in Illinois, and his VP candidate is going to be John Sparkman. Stevenson was accused of being out of touch with the people. They called him an egghead. Said he had more brains than most people have hair. Eisenhower runs with the I Like Ike campaign. Ike was Eisenhower's nickname. His patriotism was appealing here during the Cold War, and he promised to resist Korea, or resist communism, and end this conflict in Korea. Ike wins rather easily. Eisenhower is going to keep his promise to end this war. He's going to use the military to speed up peace negotiations, increasing the bombing of the North in May of '53, and even hinting that he might be willing to maybe use nuclear weapons if needed. July 27th of 1953, you're going to have the signing of an armistice. And the armistice is going to divide Korea at the 38th parallel, which is the same as where it was divided before the war. We lost around 54,000 Americans in Korea. We had 103,000 wounded. The number of Koreans and Chinese dead, 1.5 million. You had some people question whether this was all worth it, since it ended just like before it started at the 38th parallel. And there was an armistice, a ceasefire. There was never a treaty to end the Korean War. Technically, that war still goes on. The nickname of the war here is the Forgotten War. And it's just not one of the conflicts that you hear talked about. You hear about Vietnam and World War II and World War I. You just don't hear as much about Korea. And there's images from the Korean War Memorial in Washington, D.C. But Eisenhower kept his promise and got us out of there. Eisenhower's administration is going to continue to fight against communism in the world. And Ike viewed nuclear technology as the way to stop the spread of communism. John Foster Dulles, our Secretary of State, he actually went so far as he wanted to liberate all of the countries that the Soviets had taken over since the end of World War II. And he said we needed to be willing to go to the brink of war to stop communism. This becomes known as brinkmanship. Brinkmanship would only work if you had that threat of massive retaliation, even nuclear. Otherwise, nobody would ever back down. Eisenhower wasn't quite as hard-lined as Dulles. Ike preferred to use some different means. Ike would use diplomacy, where we would meet and talk and try to come up with solutions. And Ike would also use spying, using the newly created Central Intelligence Agency. Ike's going to test out some of his strategy in Iran. The Iranian premier, Mohammad Mossadegh, is going to nationalize British-owned oil fields in Iran. They're in Iran, so he made them part of Iran. Britain's an ally of ours, and so Ike suspends all U.S. aid to Iran. Ike is even going to have the CIA organize a military coup in Iran. Mossadegh ends up being arrested, and a new leader steps in place in Iran, a pro-American Shah by the name of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Many Iranians get a little annoyed in the fact that we just stuck our noses in Iran's business and helped remove a leader and put another person in his place. And you're going to see anti-American feelings begin to form in Iran. Ike's going to order some covert action in Guatemala in '54. Jacobo Arbenz Guzman was president. Elected president of Guatemala by the people. And one of the things he's going to do is he's going to take some large plantations in Guatemala, and he's going to split them up and give the land to the people, to the poor. We suspect Arbenz Guzman might have some communist tendencies to him. That sounds like a communist move. We can't have communism that close to us. So the CIA is going to be ordered to organize a small army to remove Jacobo Arbenz Guzman. In 1954, bombs go off in the capital, and a pro-U.S. government is installed in Guatemala. Arbenz Guzman's reforms were undone, but we've now stirred up resentment towards us in Latin America. Ike doesn't necessarily use the CIA in all methods. There are times where diplomacy has a more appropriate ring. Ike's going to use diplomacy with the Suez Canal crisis. Suez Canal joins the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. We had pulled out of the Suez Canal in '55. And the Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser is going to take over the Suez Canal. And when this happens, Western oil trade is threatened. That would involve oil to Western Europe having to go all the way around Africa. Nasser also prevents Israeli ships from going through the canal. In October of '56, Israel is going to move into Egyptian territory heading towards the Suez. Britain and France take the Mediterranean side of the canal. And then the Soviet Union threatens that if those three don't leave Egypt's territory, the Soviet Union will make them leave. So we're sitting back watching all of this. We aren't really involved per se, but we have influence in this. We have allies involved in this. And Ike is going to use the UN to call for a ceasefire and a withdrawal of the invaders. The invaders leave. The crisis ends. But what the crisis does do, it led to a friendlier relationship between the Arab nations and the Soviet Union, which leads Eisenhower to issue the Eisenhower Doctrine in January of '57 and says, we will provide aid to any Middle Eastern nation seeking help to resist communism. The crisis is there's going to be a continued crisis in Europe, though. 1953, Stalin dies. The new leader, the new premier of the Soviet Union, was going to be Nikita Khrushchev. When Nikita Khrushchev comes to power, one of his early things is he accuses Stalin of all sorts of ruthless crimes. And a lot of people saw this with some kind of hope. Maybe there's going to be a new era here in the Soviet Union. Poland decided to test this theory by asking for more political freedom. Nothing real bad happens to Poland. The Hungarians were inspired by Poland, and you're going to start seeing some changes there. Some moderates take over the government in Hungary, and they want democracy. They don't want to be a part of that Warsaw Pact anymore. Khrushchev responds to Hungary by sending in troops to Budapest and crushing this revolt, retaking over the government, establishing a pro-Soviet government, declaring martial law, and any leaders of that rebellion were going to be either killed or imprisoned. We immediately condemned the moves by the Soviet Union and Hungary, but we don't directly interfere, though, because we don't want to start a nuclear war over this. All we can do is we loosen some of the immigration restrictions for Eastern Europeans to come here, and after that revolt, 40,000 Hungarians do come to the U.S. The election of '56, it's Eisenhower versus Adlai Stevenson again. Eisenhower wins again. As you start getting into the late 50s, though, it appears that the United States and the Soviet Union are starting to get along a little bit better. In '59, Richard Nixon is going to visit the Soviet Union, get a little tour. Khrushchev visits the U.S., and we give him this nice little tour of the U.S. And we took him to Iowa and showed him some of our farming stuff. We took him to steel plants in Pittsburgh, took him out to Hollywood, to the movie studios. Eisenhower and Khrushchev even agree to a summit in Paris in 1960, the next year, to discuss arms reduction. Well, maybe not that kind of arms reduction. The reducing of military weapons. But In May of 1960, Khrushchev announces that a U-2 has been shot down over the Soviet Union. A U-2 is a high-altitude spy plane. Now, we immediately start off by saying, well, you didn't shoot down anything over the Soviet Union. We don't know what you're talking about. Which they show us the wreckage. To which we say, that spy plane. That wasn't a spy plane. That was clearly a lost weather research plane. We wonder where it went. To which the Soviet Union says, we have the pilot, Francis Gary Powers. We captured him after he ejected from the plane. And he admitted to being on a spy mission. Khrushchev said the only way he's going to go to the summit is if two things occur. We stop spying, and we apologize. To which Ike says, fine, I'll stop the flights. But he refused to apologize. Khrushchev refuses to meet with Ike ever again. And that U-2 incident is going to bring the Cold War back to where it had left off with those heightened tensions.